Hello once again, everybody. I'm your host, Johnathon Robson, and welcome to another episode of the C-Bus Paranormal Paracast. On today's episode, we'll be taking a trip deep into the woods of Southeastern Ohio, and I'll be discussing Salt Fork State Park, a location that's becoming infamous for its alleged Bigfoot sightings. There's no denying that Salt Fork's Bigfoot reputation is growing with each passing year, so it was only fitting that I'd make multiple trips to the park to see if I could have any luck having an experience of my own. Would I finally have my first Bigfoot encounter? Or would there be some shenanigans afoot? Perhaps things aren't always what they seem on the surface. Over the last few years, our team has expanded into the discussion of monsters and cryptids, and Salt Fork has been on my radar for a while. Obviously, Bigfoot and Sasquatch type entities are big within the paranormal communities, and I've vowed to try to get to the bottom of what folks are seeing out there. With so many reported encounters and witnesses, it's only natural to go to these locations and try to conduct our own investigations into reports of activity. And well, sometimes our discoveries might not set well with believers or deniers, depending on the believed results. I expect this will continue to be the case for future investigations as well. Just like the ghost community, there are no experts in this field, regardless of who is trending, on TV, or a big name on the convention circuit. The only thing we can do is report our findings, and it's up to you, the listener, to have your own experiences and come to your own conclusions. Before I begin today's episode, I would like to remind everybody that we do have a second show called Legends and Lore that's available on our Patreon. On the Legends and Lore podcast series, I take a look at smaller locations, stories, and legends that we've either investigated or visited over the years. At the time of this episode, we have 3 episodes in the archives, and another episode that'll be debuting in June entitled Warlock's Grave. For a small monthly donation, you'll have access to these episodes and various newspaper and research documents that I use for both shows. As with any monthly subscription, your donation will help our show's operating cost and content creation. You can also cancel at any time if needed. As always, thank you to those that are already in our community. I appreciate the support. It certainly helps to keep this operation going. You can join our Patreon community by clicking on the Patreon link on cbusparanormal.com or clicking the Support the Show link on this episode's show notes. As of right now, our first official Q&A episode will be happening in June, so I'll be asking for questions on social media for the episode. If you have anything you'd like to ask me, feel free to ask it on social media or use our contact form on cbusparanormal.com. Nothing within reason is off limits. Theories, locations, episode questions, by all means bring it to the table, and I'll answer each question the best that I can. It should be a fun episode. That being said, it's time to head deep into the woods and discuss today's cryptid adventures in Salt Fork State Park. Salt Fork State Park stretches across 17,229 acres at Guernsey County, and it's the largest state park in Ohio. It's named after its salt well that was once used by Native Americans near the southeast corner of the park. The park also has several diverse species of plants, animals, and unique features scattered throughout its acreage. It also features an 18-hole golf course, 3,000-acre lake, 2,500-foot beach, 2 marinas, and 14 hiking trails. Yeah, it's rather large. The park is also home to the Stone House Museum, also known as the Kennedy Stone House. In 1837, Benjamin Kennedy purchased 80 acres in the area and commissioned a large 2-story home. The stone house was built with large sandstone blocks, and the house's inner woodwork came from the trees on the hillside. Today, visitors can take a trip back in time and see what the home looked like when it was in use in the 1840s. Due to its unique construction, it was also listed on the National Register of Historic Places and can be visited throughout the year. No mention or word if the house is possibly spiritually active, so I'll let you speculate on that one. While most of the nation's Civil War battles occurred in the southeastern United States, southeastern Ohio also had a few skirmishes as well. Morgan's Raiders, a small group of Confederate soldiers, would make several excursions into the area, under constant pursuit from the Union troops. As the 19th century progressed, Guernsey County would also become one of Ohio's leading coal producers, and eventually the land was acquired to begin work on a new park in the 1960s. The spacious Salt Fork Lodge was opened in May of 1972. So that leads us to the Bigfoot sightings. Why here? Why Guernsey County? Well, the area is a patchwork of forested hills, meadows, and valleys which come into contact with numerous streams. And well, everywhere you look is dense forest, making it the perfect hiding spot, right? This monstrous hairy Goliath has been rumored to live in Ohio since at least the mid-1700s. It's also allegedly been seen several times in this area. There have been several claimed pieces of evidence from the county, such as cast footprints, several sightings, and reported howls. With the large amount of alleged evidence coming from this area, it was only natural the park would become home of the annual Bigfoot conference that was started in 2005. Ironically, it's now the world's longest-running Bigfoot conference as well. The park has also been featured on numerous Bigfoot television shows such as Finding Bigfoot, Monsters and Mysteries in America, and Monster Quest. It was also named as one of USA Today's top 10 Squatchiest places in 2012. One area in the park particular has had so many sightings that it's now called Bigfoot Ridge, the primitive camping area. So if you don't want to be sleeping with Sasquatch, you might want to consider staying at the lodge. So let's discuss some of the sightings at Salt Fork State Park. Similar to our episode on Mohican State Park, this segment will be highlighted with alleged sightings that have been reported through the BFRO website. The reason for this is due to their website having the largest amount of claimed Bigfoot sightings, as well as reports, audio, and interviews. It's a great resource to have, so I'll give them props for compiling all of this information. For those of you at home that would like to visit their website, it's bfro.net. And as I've previously stated, there have been many sightings in this area, so I'm only going to discuss a few of them around the area that I found interesting. The first sighting I'm going to discuss happened in October of 1979 on Putney Ridge Road. The following is a statement made to one of the BFRO researchers by one of the witnesses. What myself and brother-in-law found was a structure built of mainly blackberry vines. We were scouting for deer on an abandoned farm in an area that had been stripped for coal 35 years prior. Deer were plentiful, but not as much as present day. When we came across it, we were both following a path that materialized and split in two different directions around a spoil bank. My brother-in-law went one way, I the other. Both paths led to the top of the spoil where we came onto the structure. We were in total amazement, noting it had a kind of an igloo shape with an opening to enter. The briars were woven together to form the walls, and the inside had been cleared like it had been mowed. We stood amazed at what could have made it. We had never heard much about a Bigfoot at that time. Nobody in their right mind would have been in the area fighting thorny vegetation and biting insects to create such a thing. Then, about a month later, the same brother-in-law and his cousin were walking out of the hollow near dark when they heard the strangest animal they've ever heard. They would try to tell the family about it, and they got laughed at. Neither of us ever forgot it or entered the property in the dark. It wasn't until maybe 20 years later when I happened on a Bigfoot program showing such a structure that a bell went off as to what we had saw. Also, around the same time, other people had reported seeing things peeking in the windows around the county. For those of you that don't know what these structures look like, these hut-like structures are usually comprised of vines and other large tree branches and are allegedly habitats of our squatchy friends. I'll talk about my own structure experience a bit later in this episode. Apparently, this report also confirms that old Bigfoot is a peeper into the locals' homes as well. On May 15, 2003, a motorist had an encounter near the park on Route 77 South. He released the following statement. What I observed to this day still haunts me. I was driving on the side of the road, where it looked like a brown bear was just laying there as if it had been hit by a car. I did not completely stop. However, I did slow down to observe whatever was lying on the side of the road as it stood up, glanced, and ran off into the distance. This thing, when it took off, stood about 6'5" to 7 foot tall. After this thing took off, it stepped over the guardrail that was on the side of the road. This thing looked like a large man in an ape suit. After the creature or whatever it was took off, I did stop, rolled down the windows, but did not get out of the car because I was scared. When I rolled down the passenger window, it smelled as if a skunk was hit. The smell could have came from a skunk. I don't know where the smell came from. All I know is the smell was there after rolling down my window. I'm assuming the statements on the BFRO website are typed exactly how they were received. The grammar was a little rough on this one, but I can certainly appreciate the odd encounter. I found the description to be a bit telling for this sighting, as the witness described it as looking like a large man in an ape suit on the side of the road. Perhaps it was a prankster playing an early morning trick. It wouldn't be the first time I've read about a similar event occurring during my research for other cryptid stories. I personally tend to find sightings a bit more credible when it's obvious that the witness was trying to think of rational explanations for the sighting and experience. In this case, the witness was trying to account for the smell and thought that it might have came from a skunk. And also, I think it's odd that he specifically stated that it looked like a man in an ape suit. It's often been stated that witnesses often sense a foul smell during their encounters with alleged Bigfoots. So naturally, this encounter fits the narrative of most Bigfoot sightings. So while he certainly witnessed something, he didn't seem to be 100% convinced that it was a Bigfoot either. This story does conjure up some odd visuals, though, for its listeners. Regardless of what he's seen, it certainly left an impact on the witness. It's also important to note that there have been several sightings from the same area, so take it for what it's worth. 2004 also seemed to have been a busy year for Bigfoot sightings in the area. On August 17, 2004, near State Route 313, a witness had an early morning encounter. This was his statement on the matter. I get up every morning at about 5:15 a.m. to get ready for work, and on this morning I got up a little early, so I decided to eat a banana. I wanted to look outside to see if there was any deer or rabbits outside. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a figure that was huge and black. I thought it was a deer at first, but the more I could see of it, I realized it wasn't. This thing stood up and walked right through the crabapple trees like nothing. Then out of the corner of my left eye, I could see a smaller figure in size, but still as black as the big one. It went running like a child after its parents through the crabapple bushes, kinda wobbling as it moved through the bushes. I could see the trees shake back and forth. I wondered where the big one was and looked to my right, and there it was standing in some thick brush staring right at me through the window. I got sick to my stomach. We stood there staring at each other for less than a minute. I took one step back from the window, then it looked at my dog kennel and started walking up the hill. The trees were shaking back and forth as far as I could see, and then they were gone. The night before I threw almost rotten bananas and cantaloupe into the backyard. It was the same general location that I first noticed the large dark thing. They were gone by the next day. That last line turns out to be a little bit ironic, because the very next day there was another sighting by a couple at the park. Here's their statement. My wife and I were having a picnic supper at Salt Fork State Park on August 18, 2004, at approximately 7 p.m. After approximately 15 minutes, we decided to hike down a path into the woods with our dog. After progressing approximately 15 feet into the woods, we heard loud, unexplainable noises. The noises and howls continued as whatever it was making the noises seemed to be walking parallel with us. We were nearly 75 yards into the wooded area when we stopped and looked more closely to see what was making the noises. The noise was heard again, and I saw it and began shouting at my wife, "There it is! There it is!" Together we saw what appeared to be a nearly 8-foot-tall, dark-colored subject looking at us. We watched it for about 10 seconds, and then it walked upright in a human form, deeper into the woods and away from us. Scared, we turned and quickly walked out of the woods, hearing a noise several times behind us. We reached our picnic area, picked up our belongings, and that's when we heard it again, this time thunderously loud, and we knew it had followed us, and I believed it was about 50 feet behind us, still concealed in the woods. We grabbed our stuff and ran into our vehicle with our dog. It was the eeriest encounter we've ever had in our lives. Perhaps the BFRO researcher documenting this sighting should have asked them how many of these eerie encounters they've had. Apparently this one was the eeriest. Okay, I'll stop being a smartass. Our next encounter was reported in July of 2010 as two individuals were night fishing at the marina when they were startled by an unexpected surprise. The following statement is from one of the individuals. Unfortunately, later in the interview process, he states that he no longer talks to the other witness. Back in 2010, a friend and I were at Salt Fork Lake fishing at about 9:30 p.m. That evening, we heard some banging of trees, and the next thing we know, rocks as big as my fist were bouncing off the ground. After 6 or 7 of them, we grabbed our stuff and left. We never saw what it was, but the rocks were being thrown from a great distance. I'm 6'3" and 260 pounds, and there's no way that I could have thrown these rocks at any distance. This encounter also tends to put an odd visual in my mind, but it's straightforward and to the point. Rock throwing has also been adapted into the typical Bigfoot encounters territory, and it's not uncommon to hear witnesses experiencing such activity. It was dark, so unfortunately that would have made it difficult for these witnesses to see what was chucking rocks at them. But in this case, the two witnesses obviously felt threatened enough to move on. And the last possible encounter that I'm going to discuss today happened in June of 2013. Ironically, the location for this event happened at the primitive campground known as Bigfoot Ridge. June 17, 2013, Salt Fork State Park, Bigfoot Ridge. My girlfriend and I went to bed at about 10 p.m. Off and on we heard really weird loud screams. At about 1 a.m. she woke me up in terror because it was outside our tent just feet from our heads pulling handfuls of grass. She was frozen with fear and waited for it to walk away. When it did, she opened the tent where she heard twigs cracking and shined the flashlight in that direction when she saw its really big yellow eyes. They were close together and it turned towards the wooded tree line. We believe it watched us grab our stuff and end the trip early. We left our tent and hauled it out of there fast. We were completely traumatized over the experience and would like to talk to someone who believes. We also believe we attracted it because I was knocking trees just after sunset. In this instance, the couple was so terrified at what they experienced that they literally up and left their tent and campsite in the middle of the night. I'm not sure if I personally buy into the popular wood knocking that's believed to be a form of Bigfoot communication, or in some cases intimidation, but it is certainly interesting that the boyfriend in this scenario was attempting Bigfoot communication techniques prior to the sighting. Was it related, or was it just a coincidence? I'll leave that up for you to decide. So there are a few of the more odd Bigfoot sightings in and near the park. I find the amount of sightings in the area fascinating. While I considered Mohican State Park a bit of a warm-up in my travels, Salt Fork State Park's claims are completely on a different level. From everything that I've read and researched, I felt this area of Ohio would be at the top of my list of where I could have a possible experience. So naturally, I was excited to travel to Southeastern Ohio and see what all the commotion was about. I'll continue our discussion on Salt Fork State Park after this short break. Paranormal investigators, it's a new year, and you know what that means. It's time to start planning for your upcoming investigations and to also stock up on new ghost hunting devices. Thankfully, GhostStop has you covered. GhostStop has everything you need to advance your team's research and theories. They have digital recorders, camcorders, thermal imagers, EMF devices, laser grids, and much, much more. If you need it, they likely have it. Our team has used several GhostStop products over the years. Click the GhostStop link on this episode's information panel or on our website at cbusparanormal.com and you can browse through their extensive catalog and place your order today. By using the show's affiliate link on our player and website, you'll also be supporting our show, and this lets GhostStop know that we sent you. GhostStop, paranormal equipment made by investigators for investigators. Are you interested in starting your own podcast, but not sure how to get started? Perhaps it's time to look to Buzzsprout for some direction. Buzzsprout has helped over 100,000 podcasters get their projects off the ground, and they can help you get your podcast listed on every major podcasting platform. They also have several guides to help you navigate through the process of recording and finding the right equipment to use. With Buzzsprout, you get a podcasting website, audio players, and detailed analytics to see how people are listening to your show. It will also provide you with the necessary tools to promote your episodes. Podcasting isn't hard when you have the right partners, and Buzzsprout wants to see you succeed. Click our Buzzsprout affiliate link on this media player's information panel to start your journey into podcasting. It lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you, and you'll receive a $20 credit if you sign up for one of their paid hosting plans after your second paid invoice. Buzzsprout, let's create something great together. Welcome back. For this investigation, I decided that I would take at least 2 days at the park to get a feel for possible activity, and to also see if I could find any evidence of the park's alleged infamous beast. The first day of my investigation would occur on July 29, 2022, and being a night owl in general, I decided to stay up all night and head down to Salt Fork in the early morning hours during the week. I was hoping to have as little human and hiker interaction as possible, and boy did I get my wish. I arrived at around 7 a.m. and I was stunned by the sheer amount of woods in the park and outside of its perimeter. The park certainly felt squatchy if you consider that a real term, and I immediately looked around wondering what I got myself into for this investigation. During the overnight and early morning hours, the area received a fair amount of rain, and while the ground was wet, it wasn't going to be much of an obstacle for me. However, I was thinking that the ground's dampness might make it easier to find possible tracks should I encounter any. So I exited the car and immediately headed toward the Stonehouse Loop Trail, and wouldn't you know it, the park's trails were completely empty. The stillness and the atmosphere could only be described as interesting, and it was very quiet. If anything moved, I'd certainly hear it. As I trudged ahead, I remained focused on the task at hand, and I kept a steady eye on my surrounding environment. Before I made my trip to the park, I had researched several online videos and claims of alleged sightings, so it was fairly easy to distinguish familiar locations as I came upon them. About 1/4 of a mile into the loop, I noticed what could have possibly been a partial track. However, my skeptical thinking quickly took over my train of thought. Why would there be just one single track, and why would it be on the trail itself? Because of the rain, I could also see human footprints surrounding it, and the possible credibility to this partial track took a hit. Similar to the ghost side of the paranormal field, there are also pranksters and people that like to mess with believers. So while I documented the partial print, it's highly likely that this was placed here for that purpose. I had already planned to do a fair amount of wandering off the trails for possible tracks, but this partial print was just way too convenient in its placement. As I continued on, I noticed the constant sounds of the woods. This included branches falling and other debris. I kinda laughed to myself knowing that some of the claims of Bigfoot activity includes items being thrown and knocking type noises. I could just imagine how animated the setting could get under the right conditions, and with the right observer, that might mistake every little noise for the infamous beast. While I continued looking through my skeptical lens, I also wanted to remain open-minded to anything that might occur. Eventually I reached the stone house, and marveled at the building's architecture. Ironically, one of the volunteers had just arrived, and we talked about the park for a bit. Without mentioning why I was there, naturally Bigfoot still came up in the conversation, and she provided some key information on some of the hotspots and alleged sighting locations. I found it interesting that she had initiated that part of the discussion. For all she knew, I could have just been an everyday hiker or nature watcher filming and taking photos. Or perhaps she just took one look at me and knew I was a weirdo. I'm not sure, but I was still thankful for the information. Shortly after, I'd complete the stone house loop without any further observations of anything strange or paranormal in nature. The next trail that I would venture down would be Morgan's Knob Loop. Similar to the Stone House Trail, I remembered this trail appearing in several of the online Bigfoot videos. It's hard to explain the feeling of entering into this trail for the first time. Outside of the trail, everything looks nice and green, and as soon as you walk into the trees, it starts looking like a horror movie. Immediately felt like I was in an endless maze of pine trees. It just had a bit of a creepy, spooky vibe in the early morning hours, especially with the surrounding silence. I'll admit my mind started wandering a bit, and I muttered to myself, "Great, this is how I'm going to go out, mauled to death by a fabled beast in the middle of nowhere." After taking everything in for a minute, I continued on, and eventually recognized the location that was featured on the show Finding Bigfoot. During the episode, I showed a video of what looked like a Bigfoot tearing down a tree from a distance. Ironically, even the show debunked the footage and believed it was somebody messing around or a logger. The size of the figure in the video seemed to be about the size of your average human being by their estimations, and the idea of a prankster immediately came to mind, as I've also seen some highly questionable Bigfoot footage posted online from the park as well. Again, everything just seemed convenient. During my journey around the trail, I didn't notice anything really paranormal in nature, other than a deer that came running by me out of nowhere, and the foundations of some long-forgotten structures. It was quiet, extremely quiet. I would end the first day by exploring the Bigfoot Ridge camping area, the beach, and the Salt Fork State Park Lodge. And I'll have to give it to them, I was impressed with their selection of Bigfoot merchandise. It was only natural that I would leave the lodge with a Bigfoot Stole My Beer at Salt Fork State Park t-shirt. Overall, for the first day, I was impressed with the sights and sounds of the park, and I knew that I would need to form yet another game plan for my second visit. The next visit would happen a few months later, on November 6, 2022, and this time I'd bring my stepson Isaiah along with me for the ride. I figured he might make some decent Bigfoot bait. After telling him about the creepy pine forest at the Morgan's Knob Trail, I figured we'd start there to see his reaction walking into the forest for the first time. Naturally, he stopped at the tree line and looked at me, commenting how creepy it looked. While I filmed a bit at the entrance, another group wandered in, and we both watched our reactions as well. There's just something that's creepy about that scenery change that gets people's attention. It's interesting. We then completed a quick hike through the area and then ventured into the Pinecrest Loop. The scenery on the Pinecrest Loop was absolutely amazing. There were several large rocks and water views. The entire time we were looking for footprints or any signs of possible Bigfoot activity. We passed a marked sign for the trail that had a Bigfoot sticker with an arrow on it. I joked to Isaiah, hell, this might be easier than we thought. And ironically, at the end of the trail we seen several twisted tree branches and what most folks refer to as Bigfoot structures. Supposed makeshift lodging for the beast that's been featured on numerous television shows over the years, usually made out of large tree branches or vines. Isaiah had the look of a non-believer that suddenly started to question everything he believed. While the sight of these structures looked cool, I immediately became suspicious once more. Suspending my disbelief for a moment, I had to ask myself, why and how? Why would a Bigfoot, if it truly exists, build these structures right by the hiking trail? It seemed pretty odd that an elusive beast such as this would build a structure at this location of all places. What could bend these trees into such a weird formation? Or better yet, how many people did it take to stage this interesting prank? There's no way that you could convince me that these structures weren't man-made. And ironically, the setting provided further proof of pranksters and shenanigans occurring at the park. I'm not gonna lie, while I wasn't necessarily surprised by this newly found information, I was a little deflated considering the reputation the park's gained for its Bigfoot sightings over the years. While we were taking some time to examine the huts and laughing a bit, an older gentleman came up and started talking with us. He stated that he hikes these trails all the time, and he's naturally seen people fooling around in this area building these so-called structures. He also stated that he's walked nearly everywhere in the park many times and never seen any possible signs of a Bigfoot. After a nice lengthy discussion with the gentleman about the paranormal, music, and our families, he went on his way. I did appreciate the insights he provided, and we could certainly tell he was a credible source by all the information he gave us. Oftentimes, local residents seem to have the best insights and knowledge that isn't always available online. We would finish up the day by visiting Hossick's Cave and the old McCleary Cemetery. It's also located in the park. Again, amazing scenery, but sadly no signs of any Sasquatches, as to be expected. I'm not necessarily saying that there isn't a possibility the creature does exist, but during my time at the park, I certainly seen a lot more evidence of fakery than possible legit activity. So in conclusion, after spending several hours within Salt Fork State Park and being open-minded to the possibility of a Bigfoot sighting, it didn't surprise me that I returned home with nothing of the sort. However, I was able to learn a few things, and I was able to see how far some people will go to try to convince others that the beast exists, either for their own selfish reasons, or for their own amusement of pranking believers. And damn it, those convention guest speaker spots won't fill themselves. On our Mohican State Park episode, I mentioned that Bigfoot and cryptids are big business, and there's currently a lot of money flowing through the cryptid conventions, crafts, and television shows. So it's not surprising that the Ohio park system has started to embrace these stories and alleged encounters. After all, it helps with their fundraising and interest in their sites, and to me that's honestly a good thing. However, all of this attention and publicity also brings out the previously mentioned behavior. The more exposure the topic gets, the more people that will likely dilute the fraction of credibility it might have. Alleged Bigfoot evidence can be faked in the form of these tree structures, bent branches, footcast, and so forth. So while the possibility that these Sasquatch-type creatures might still exist is out there, I still think some sort of valid evidence would have been found by now. I can't see a creature such as this being this elusive for this long without a body showing up in some shape or form, especially with how many sightings that seem to occur on a daily basis across the globe. While the idea of Bigfoot is fun and an intriguing thought, realistically I'm not convinced that this beast exists. If anything, my recent investigations have made me even more skeptical of the legends being told. So what are these witnesses seeing? I recently heard a collective groan in the Bigfoot community when a new article appeared online attempting to link Bigfoot sightings with areas of known black bear sightings. Is it possible that the beast is being confused for other rarely seen animals, or in some cases pranksters and humans? I think it's highly possible. It's hard to fathom the amount of sightings that occur across the world on any given day, and yet there's still no evidence to definitively prove that it exists. For now, I'm putting Bigfoot back on the shelf, and I'll be venturing into several other beast ghouls and legends. However, I'm sure I'll be coming back to this infamous creature sometime in the future. Well, that concludes this month's episode on Salt Fork State Park. While I love the vast wilderness the park has to offer, I'm highly skeptical of its alleged Bigfoot activity. With all the television shows and the publicity that they get, it's only natural for attention seekers and troublemakers to try to get in on the action. After all, there's quite a bit of money floating around in the cryptid community, and Lord knows we can't have the convention circuit going dry. That being said, Salt Fork State Park is still my favorite park in the state that I've visited. There's just something to it. It's just a fun location to explore, and I highly recommend visiting it if you get the opportunity. For more information on Salt Fork State Park, I would recommend adding them on Facebook. Their website address is far too long to say on here. On next month's episode, I'll be covering something that's not as widely known, but it's a bit of a throwback to our Prospect Place episodes, the train wreck that occurred in Dresden, Ohio in 1912. Let's just say, I have some new information that paranormal investigators have been asking me about for a long time. On episode 15, I'll be covering the entire story of the wreck, its location, and my experiences. As always, thank you for listening, and thank you for the support. I'll see you all again next month. Thank you for listening.